Yes, there are some Jews behaving badly in Judea and Samaria. There is some criminal activity. It is no more than the criminal activity that exists in any society anywhere else in the world. That's not to say it shouldn't be dealt with, but it is not the equivalent of the Palestinian campaign of violence that targets Israel and its Jewish citizens. Not by any conceivable metric. And the rest of the Western power brokers, they know that Hamas is never going to lay down its weapons, and they are never going to commit armed forces to go into Gaza and take Hamas's weapons. They want to keep moving forward. They want to keep moving along with this process because it looks good for them, and so they need Israel to get on board. Today we're going to touch on the very tricky topic of what's called settler violence in Judea and Samaria, what the world likes to call the West Bank. The problem here is not that we're trying to avoid laying blame on a portion of the Jewish population that's committing crimes. The problem here is that there is a concerted effort, an organized campaign to draw moral equivalence between that criminal activity and the much larger campaign of terrorist violence perpetrated by Palestinian Arabs against Jewish Israelis. Now, there is a problem with a small group of people, of Jewish people living in Judea and Samaria, who express their frustration over the situation, the security situation, by committing crimes, by vandalizing and destroying property, and even by physically assaulting Palestinian Arabs. This happens, there's no point to denying it, but there are some key differences and some critical context that is always left out by those who want to present a picture in which this criminal activity is on par with Palestinian terrorism that targets Israelis. The first bit of information, the first bit of context that is left out is the overall numbers. Jewish attacks against Palestinian Arabs in Judea and Samaria are reported at around 600 in the first half of this year, first half of 2026. This is a relatively small number. And let's keep in mind that anywhere in the world, every society has bad people doing bad things, criminal activity, and they're treated as such. The Jewish, what they want to label as Jewish terrorism, but the criminal activity of these people, which is primarily vandalism. First of all, let's get that out of the way. There are physical confrontations, there are physical attacks, but the majority of these incidents are vandalism, property damage and vandalism. Now, given the numbers, it is obvious that this is a fringe movement carried out by a small portion of the Jewish population that lives in these territories. Thus, it is not representative of that Jewish population, and certainly not of Israeli Jewish society as a whole. Not representative. More than that, it is widely rejected by the vast majority of Israelis, who view it as unacceptable and needing to be dealt with as criminal activity. On the flip side, Palestinian attacks against Jews living in Judea and Samaria, I'm not talking about major terrorist attacks by Palestinian terrorists against Israelis living in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. I'm talking about violence by Palestinian Arabs against the Jews living in Judea and Samaria. These incidents number in the thousands, even in the first half of this year, in the thousands. Because if we're going to, compare apples to apples here, then if acts of Jewish vandalism and property damage are counted amongst this quote-unquote violence, then so too must acts of Arab vandalism and property damage against Jews. And not only stone throwing and throwing of Molotov cocktails and worse incidents of stabbing and car rammings and shootings. So these incidents, if you take them all, number in the thousands. And they occur on a daily basis. On a daily basis. Now, contrary to the reaction in Israel regarding Jewish criminal acts, in the Palestinian Authority, polls repeatedly show broad public support for this type of violence targeting Jews living in Judea and Samaria. Broad public support. More than that, this kind of activity enjoys tacit approval and support of the Palestinian Authority. Now, in an official capacity, the Palestinian Authority rejects these acts, rejects this behavior, because it has to. But under the surface, behind closed doors, it's obvious that this is receiving tacit support. How do we deduce this? Because the Palestinian Authority continues to have a policy of revolving door arrests. People are arrested for committing these types of crimes and then very quickly released from prison. Their arrest is a show, is all for show. And there's also the fact that the Palestinian Authority continues with its Pay for Slay program, which offers generous monthly stipends to the families of Palestinians who have succeeded in killing lots of Jews. So the more Jews you kill, the bigger your stipend. This is incentive to engage in terrorist activity from the Palestinian Authority itself. So there's a big contrast between the way that Israel and Israeli society sees the actions of Jewish criminals who target Palestinian Arabs, and the way that Palestinian Authority and Palestinian society views Palestinians who attack Jews. This dichotomy, this comparison is never presented in mainstream media coverage of what they call settler violence. Now, and to push a little bit further into the reactions of both societies and both governments, Jewish attacks on Palestinian Arabs in Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, are treated as criminal activity, and appropriate measures are taken by the authorities. When these people are found, they are arrested, they go to prison, they go through a lengthy judicial process, and they are punished. And society at large shuns them, ostracizes them, even in some cases. Again, on the Palestinian side, something very, very different. Palestinian attacks against Jews, especially really successful ones that result in dead Jews, are celebrated. We see this on social media constantly. A successful terrorist attack that results in dead Israelis is followed by the handing out of candy and other sweets in acts of celebration in Palestinian cities and localities. More than that, really successful terrorists their actions are actually taught in Palestinian schools. They're celebrated as part of the history. More than that, the really, really successful terrorists, the ones who kill many Jews, have streets named after them, have schools named after them, and have children's summer camps named after them. So the actions of these people are not only celebrated, but are taught to the next generation and are presented to the next generation as heroic and something to aspire to. This contrasts very, very sharply with Israeli society and Israeli reactions to criminal activity by so-called Jewish settlers, which are shunned, which are punished, and which are treated as unacceptable, and the people who commit them are viewed as pariahs in Israeli society. Fairly or unfairly, that's the way that Israeli society treats them. The mainstream media, of course, gives the opposite impression of all of these facts. It either leaves out this context entirely, or it presents it in such a way that you get the opposite view. Jewish attacks, anytime they happen, and even if we're just talking about graffiti or property damage, not even physical attack and certainly not even death, but every time they happen, they are treated as representative, and not only of the Jewish quote-unquote settler population, but of Israel as a whole. And the level of coverage of these incidents gives the impression that they are happening all the time, thousands of them, when in fact the opposite is true. The Palestinian attacks are happening all the time, thousands of them, on a daily basis, multiple times. Palestinian attacks, meanwhile, in the mainstream international media, are treated as non-representative and as fringe phenomena. Even October 7th, even October 7th, was treated as something that most Palestinians had nothing to do with, despite the fact that polls conducted after October 7th revealed broad public support, not only for Hamas, but for what Hamas did in southern Israel. Broad public support. Israeli authorities are often criticized in the media for not taking harsher action against the Jewish criminals committing these crimes in Judea and Samaria. In fact, the Israeli authorities do take action. They arrest these people, they put them on trial, many of them go to jail. It's not exactly obvious what the Western media would want Israel to do differently. Israel is a democratic state with rule of law and a judicial system. The protocols must be followed. The mainstream media, the international community, of course, would like to see Israel, go so far even as to hang these people. That's not going to happen because Israel is not a dictatorship and it doesn't have the death penalty, and it's going to follow its own rules. And those rules work because Israel is a safe, democratic nation with rule of law. And that's going to apply to every criminal case, not just if someone robs a store in Tel Aviv, but if someone commits property damage in Samaria. The same rules will apply to both criminals. On the flip side, the Palestinian Authority is almost given a pass in the mainstream media. The Palestinian Authority's complicity is all but ignored by the media. Even when Pay for Slay, this program whereby the Palestinian Authority pays generous stipends, monthly stipends, effectively salaries, to the families of Palestinian terrorists who have killed Israelis. Even when this is called out publicly and openly by the US Congress and by several European governments, the mainstream media all but ignores the story. It should be headline news that the Palestinian Authority continues to do this despite signing agreements, peace agreements with Israel that forbid this type of activity. The fact that they keep doing this is ignored by the media, even when it's called out by the foreign governments who are involved in the peace process. So this represents a clear double standard on the part of the media. They call out the Israeli government, even though the Israeli government is following the rule of law and punishing people who commit crimes, while ignoring the fact that the Palestinian Authority is complicit in not only criminal activity, but terrorism, and that after it signed agreements that it wouldn't do so. So in short, yes, there are some Jews behaving badly in Judea and Samaria. There is some criminal activity. It is no more than the criminal activity that exists in any society anywhere else in the world. That's not to say it shouldn't be dealt with, but it is not the equivalent of the Palestinian campaign of violence that targets Israel and its Jewish citizens, not by any conceivable metric, not in the numbers of incidents that occur, not in the responses of the relative authorities, and not in the way that it is received by the public at large. Don't be fooled.